the tradition of the president's address is that several presidents reflect upon a particular topic. I chose the topic because I started the discussion. And my idea is radical challenges to development ethics or emerging weaknesses of development ethics as DE has been recently pursued. I'm particularly interested in looking to our future and seeing what sorts of weaknesses we're facing at present in our work. And so we'll turn to our first presenter, and normally David Crocker would take first place because he was the first president. We will go to Nigel Dower at this point. And Nigel, please open up your microphone and I will.
We lost you, Eric.
Yeah.
But now we can listen to you, Nigel.
I can't share the screen and my PowerPoint because the host disabled it. Can someone enable me to share a screen? I could earlier, but I can't now.
Eric is setting it up.
Well, I sent it to Eric so he could note it. Get a slideshow. Yeah, thank you. Okay, can you all hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, let me get on quickly because we haven't much time. And sadly, that Dave doesn't seem to be able to join us. He would have been the first. He was president for 15 years, whereas most of us have had somewhat shorter periods since then. And so I'm not sure if I answered Eric's challenge to consider radical challenges to development ethics, but I've identified two challenges which interest me and might be of interest to others. So I'm just going to take you through them very quickly. One of the challenges is, I think, how we relate to cognate concerns of other organizations and people. And the other one is about how we understand ourselves, our internal identity, which I think are relevant to thinking about the future of IDEA. So first of all, the relationship to cognate concerns. It seems to me that there are many concerns out there, many of which seem to be dealing with much the same issues, value issues as we are. One that I've been particularly interested in recent years is Kate Brower's donut economics, the framing of what an economy ought to be about in terms of staying within the outer limits, environmental limits, and not allowing people to fall below the inner ring of the donut in terms of well-being, and generally concerned with creating the conditions in which people live good lives. And I found it a very attractive model. And then there's well-being economics. There's circular economy thinking that's in some ways relevant too. Of course, there's the capabilities approach. And I imagine many people working capabilities approach are dealing with the same issues, but not necessarily calling it development ethics as such. And then much of the concerns of climate justice have to do with the same sort of thing. And so development ethics interfaces with these other discourses in all sorts of ways. But I've become aware over the years that, although I find the phrase development ethics immensely attractive and always has ever since I met it, there are many people, development ethics is a terminology that's either not used particularly or is less attractive to them. I'm intrigued by one thing I've been involved in for the last few years, which is a UK charity called the Food Ethics Council. And they have a tagline that says, promoting a food system which is fair to people, animals, and planet through the lenses of fair share, fair play, and fair say. And I find this whole way of thinking extremely interesting and a useful tool, as it were, for thinking about things. But what I want to say about that is that I see my working in this as very much something I do in the spirit of development ethics. But if you asked anyone else in the organization, were they doing development ethics? They'd say, well, what's that? I don't know that I would call myself someone doing that. But it's not just that people don't use it, but nevertheless deal with the issues that we deal with. It's a sad fact that many people, I think, are put off by the language of development. Do you remember Jeffrey Sachs's The Development Dictionary, which is as a sort of diatribe against all development thinking? And it's linked to one Latin American saying many years ago, we don't want to be developed by you, but liberated from you. And in a more modest way, an organization I've been very involved in Aberdeen called Aberdeen for a Fairer World, we used to have employees called Development Education Advisors. And now they're called Global Learning Advisors. They're doing the same thing, but a different language is used. So I suppose what I'm really working up to is that there are many, many different organizations out there, many using different discourses, which to a larger or smaller extent overlap exactly with what we're trying to do. And sometimes the language of development isn't altogether attractive to other people. So I think one of the challenges that we have as an organization is how we sort of position ourselves in relationship to all these other concerns in a way that's productive and releases energy rather than creates unnecessary tensions or disputes about what's really the best way of doing things. So I suppose I want to say, so we need a time and place to be upfront about it in some context, but also a time and place to be exactly the opposite, not exactly being upfront, without saying that what we are doing is what we think of as development ethics. So I don't know whether others would see this as a kind of challenge about how we position ourselves in this broad arena of concerns that are out there. Many other people are much more motivated now by other sets of concerns. So, and yet they're doing something which we would think to be right in the direction we're wishing on. So, Eric, next slide. So the second question I want to ask, which is linked to this and comes out of it, is how do we see ourselves doing development ethics? Now, I want to preface this with another story. Way back in 2005, I was in Ottawa staying with Jay Drydeck, who was the next president after me, but he can't be here either. He's, I think, in a holiday out of range from technology. It was in his kitchen, and I was there for a conference he was organizing, and we got into quite a big discussion about what development ethics was. And I remember when something like this, I suggested that development ethics is about everything to do with life going better in a society. Every dimension of what makes a society progress seemed to me to be about development, therefore about ethics. And although at that time, just before he published his book, I didn't know David Cocker's phrase, which I've used often since, beneficial social change. It's interesting that that phrase he used, I think many of us now like to use again, is a very general one. It's about social change in a society of a very general kind. Whereas Jay, I remember at the time, he might not say this now, was very clear in saying, surely development ethics is about economic development, but it's about how to, as it were, frame it within appropriate ethical factors. What are the ethical factors to constrain it, the way it is done, who benefits, and so on, so from economic gains. And Jay at that time was quite keen to see that development ethics was very much centered on economic activity, not economic growth. And the ethical issues arose from giving a critique of those economic activities. And but recent thinking about Lebre for this seminar, which some of us attended in just before this conference, it reminded me that Lebre's, when he was talking about the ethics of development, very much talks about economy and humanism and development humane and so on. And it was centered on this idea of economic activity. And it seems to me over the years, an awful lot of work in development ethics has centered on this, the ethical framework within which economic activity and growth occurs. But it seems to me increasingly, development ethics has become much more general about a very wide range of ethical concerns relating to how societies function, organize themselves, how they relate to one another internationally, and so on and so forth. Examples are, of course, something Asun will probably say more about in a moment: climate change, sustainability, ecocide, the way we're damaging the environment, destroying nature, issues of racial justice and injustice, recompense and past wrongs over many dimensions now. And it's quite clear that when you think about it, many of these issues are not at all about economics, or only partly about economics. They're about other dimensions of human dignity and status and understanding and so on, and how we treat nature. And it seems to me that we've fallen naturally into thinking that development ethics is engaged with these issues. So I take it, what I'm really concluding then is that, or put it this way, when Jay and I had this discussion over breakfast, or a long breakfast, Jay said, it's a pity you hadn't recorded this and turned this into an article. It would have been really interesting. And we didn't ever get around to trying to put it out. And so far as I know, I've not been conscious of any kind of explicit discussion about whether development ethics is more usefully framed as considering the ethical framework within which economic activity occurs, or should we think of development ethics as concerned with these wider questions about society? And yet it seems to me an explicit discussion about this might well be useful, and therefore that's a kind of challenge, an internal challenge to do with our own identity. Thank you very much.
Okay, all right. So I will try to be brief in my thoughts, and I hope I'm not repeating something I said earlier. But when I thought about the question of radical challenges for development ethics, I thought that perhaps today I want to focus on a particular one, and that is how to move beyond rethinking and reframing so development ethics becomes guidance for the needed systemic transformations that we need. Let me explain you the story behind this thought. Many of you know that my professional trajectory is very eclectic, and I have moved from philosophical development ethics to sociology of knowledge in the multilateral system, and from there to focus on social and human dimensions of climate change. And more recently, I work a lot on the role of technology in achieving climate resilience and sustainability. And then this topic of moving beyond reframing actually comes from during the COVID, took an extra job helping the International Science Council in a project with UNDP, which was part of the celebrations of the 30th anniversary of the HDRs. And the project was about rethinking human development in the 21st century. And there, the issue of relevance and impact of the concept human development was a topic used in consultation and interviews that I did with scientists and practitioners. It refreshed my mind very much that actually IDEA has in fact addressed the issue on how to make development ethics more influential and more impactful. And if I recall correctly, I may be wrong, this was in Honduras back in 2002, and even in debates with the HDCA many years ago. But a lot of the debate there was also around framing issues. So why are the framing issues not enough? Because I think that what they did in this Human Development Initiative, we identified several directions that needed to be followed. For example, integrating the environment, more focus on social cohesion, integration of other human dimensions such as psychological issues that were not central in the HT concept before, and even the central role of technology as well as a central role for democratic deliberation. But yet the follow-up, which is interesting, it's revolving around improving indicators that can truly show the human face of development work. This, in a sense, is puzzling, if you wish, as in the project we were told again and again that the single biggest failure of the HDR project was this confusion of the ethical grounding of human development with index measures. But then the response is, which of course makes a lot of sense, that if we are better at the indicators, we may have more possibility for impact. And I don't want to say that indicators are not important. Of course they are, but alone, I don't think they are enough. So I think that a radical challenge for development ethics is precisely to truly retake these issues in today's context and to think about how to be more, not only impactful, but more salient and more relevant for all sorts of stakeholders in today's work. And I think part of the answer lies precisely in some of the work that we have done in the climate change field, because here, as all of you know, there has been and still is an enormous frustration that the science doesn't lead to action. We have the science is clear, and yet the transformative change that needs to follow is not coming. So there is quite a lot of very interesting work around systemic transformations and how to leverage those transformations. And this is a topic, a colleague mentioned it in the Q&A earlier, that is very much at the center of Horizon Europe and the research and innovation funding efforts in the European Commission, flowing from a very fantastic economist called Mariana Mazzucato, but also many other people with the idea that we need to sort of build up science in the same way we build missions, like the mission to the moon was, right? So you first get the idea, where do you want to go? And then you build the RNI system that gets us there. It's still unclear how are we going to do that, but at least the idea is good. So what is, I think, interesting for development ethics, and the colleague also mentioned this, is that the work is driven by the need of doing science differently. It's about co-designing and co-producing with policymakers and stakeholders, with communities, with citizens, with vulnerable groups. This is not just about consulting or participatory methodologies, but true co-designing ideas and solutions. And I think that whatever development ethics does from now onwards, it needs to be more salient and usable for its stakeholders and rule not only by theoretical perspectives, which we need them, but also effectively engage in actual processes of change. And in particular, I think systemic transformation should be the center. And I tell you why. Because the problems now, and Nigel also said a little bit of this, compared to, let's say, 25 years ago when I met this crowd, is that I think the problems are acknowledged to be more complex and more interrelated. There is more awareness that we cannot solve the social issues without the environmental, that we cannot change politics if the political economy or the financial system or technological innovation go in separate directions. So I think there is more acknowledgement that we live at times of rule that are ruled by cascades of risk, environmental, social, financial, health, and that we know that these risks are interconnected. And I think the case of COVID was a very obvious and evident situation that showed it to us. Yet, and here is where development ethics comes in, the cause of all this risk and the potential solutions are very human. The solutions and the behavior change that we need and the policy change are issues that are truly human. And I think there lies the hope. At the same time, there is huge resources offered by science and technology, the digital capabilities enabling people to mobilize in hours, the call for change, to top unfair rulers, to protest, to build vaccines in record times, or to show us, like recently, the universe in color, which was fascinating. So I think that the key is to say that development ethics has a role to play in shifting these cascades of risk, transforming to cascades of solutions. And that is, to me, the meaning of the term systemic transformation. So I may sound romantic, but I believe that we all need to be more engaged, more closely with mobilizing transformations, with understanding what tips things. And one of my very good colleagues and an excellent scholar, Karen O'Brien, says that systemic transformation is only such when it starts with transforming values and deeply held beliefs at all scales. And that's exactly what we know how to do, how to understand the role of those values and the role of those beliefs, cutting across institutional, political, but also personal dimensions. So I think development ethics has a huge role to play in processes that go beyond what I think our founding fathers consider, because the world is truly different and things are happening very fast. The risks are huge and systemic perspectives more common and more widely recognized. And the value and beliefs that we needs to be brought up to the surface, what really rules all these existing pathways and what needs to change is exactly what I think we need. So we need to work more on how to make the discipline more salient and more usable, not only in science policy interfaces, but also in all four fronts, more able to engage in transdisciplinary processes and to inspire action. And this is not only about better indicators, it's about true interdisciplinary teams working hand in hand with communities. It's about working beyond the science, community, beyond practitioners, integrate people, communities, companies, governments, artists, indigenous people, and to learn from all of them, as well as guiding them in those transformational processes that are emerging everywhere, because everybody really needs to transform from business models to energy systems. So this is, I think, the moment of moving beyond theoretical reflection, helping sort out conflicts of interest and conflicts of values, trade-offs amongst important things, disagreements, and finding ways forwards and grounds for consensus. And I know many of you already do and are doing this type of work. And I believe that it may help development ethics be more salient and more impactful, but it needs to move to the center, the sort of type of more transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary work alongside the theoretical and the philosophical. So those are my thoughts for today, and I hope they are inspiring to all of you. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks so much, Hassan. And I have an idea, particularly because we're recording this and people can lace things together later. David Crocker, our first president, has shown up online. Dave, shout it out. Yeah, Dave, stop me.
I made it. I was just completely disconnected and but I'm back. I'm on now. Thanks a lot.
Super. Now an interesting question. Will you be available for our meeting on Sunday morning? Dave,
I didn't understand you.
will you be available for our meeting on Sunday morning?
On Sunday morning?
Yes.
Sure. Okay,
then I am going to stretch the president's address across 2 days. I'm just going to declare now, part 2 of the president's address with 3 people speaking will be available on Sunday, live in person and in 3D and broadcast over the internet, because that's the way we roll. Yeah.
And recorded.
Eric, you've got a bad echo, and I heard Sunday morning, but that's about all I got.
Switch to your computer. Okay. I am on mute. So, Dave, good to have you.
Better.
Good to be able to hear you. We will start part 2 of the lecture on Sunday. We have time for a tiny amount of question, maybe not answer, given that these are philosophers. Does anyone here have a thought or a question for one of our first 2 presenters?
I would be interested in the reference that that's the speaker. Brian?
Okay, so Hassan, you referred to Karen Bryant. Could you elaborate on the source?
I can give you the reference. Karen O'Brien, still is a pioneer in adaptation work and in transformations in relation to climate change. And she has done fantastic work. She's actually a human geographer. And I always said, you have become a philosopher, because that's what she has ended up basically focusing upon. But what I think is very interesting is this connection of the two levels, right? So the social and the human dimensions of climate change is very dominated by human geography and other social sciences. But when you are listening to them, they talk about basic philosophical issues. And many of the discussions fall at the level, or raise at the level, not fall, of values and beliefs. That was my point. But I can put in the chat the reference and the name, okay?
Dave, sorry, Eric, if I could pick up on something. I mean, it seemed to me that our son was pushing further what I was sort of saying more gently about what we need to do in it there, or thinking about development ethics, that it has to connect up with a much wider range of issues than perhaps we thought we were dealing with 20, 25 years ago or whatever. And it also seems to me to raise an interesting question. If we engage with all these other organizations, I think there's still a question about the style of our engagement, as to whether we come out guns blazing, this is what we're doing, it's called development ethics, this is it, or whether we bring our development expertise and perspective to these other concerns in a gentler way.
On the Zoom now.
In a gentler way that doesn't, as it were, necessarily broadcast exactly what we're doing. So I think that there's always, to me, there's a kind of link between what we were saying. Sorry, was that not heard? Huh?
We heard you. Yeah, we heard. All right. Well, I think we really have to rush off to another venue. We'll post this and people can mull on it.